A man has died in Hong Kong after being caught in clashes between pro-democracy demonstrators and police. The 70-year-old street cleaner was hit in the head with a brick on Wednesday. It's not clear who threw it. Earlier this month, a student fell from a car park and later died from his injuries. The unrest in Hong Kong has worsened in recent days after more than 5 months of anti-government unrest. Well, let's cross over to Hong Kong, where our correspondent Matthias Berlinger is standing by for us. Matthias, this is now the second death related to the protests within a week. What more do we know about how this particular incident happened?
We know that two groups of people were confronting each other, hurling bricks at each other. One of the groups were protesters, and the other group were people who were against the protest. It is not very clear where these people came from. It happened at a suburb of Hong Kong in the very north, near the Chinese border, whether they were from the place or whether they had gathered there. So these two groups were hurling bricks at each other, and this street cleaner, city administration said he was a street cleaner on his lunch break, was in the middle between these two groups, and he was hit then by a brick. It is not clear whether he belonged to any of the groups or whether he just stood in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, this brick-throwing incident clearly shows that people in Hong Kong are divided on their views about the protests, and innocent people are getting caught up in it. The difference in opinion in Hong Kong extends to Chinese mainlanders living there. Let's take a look.
A neighborhood forum on Hong Kong's political crisis, one of many such events that Hong Kong's vibrant civil society has organized. Sociology lecturer Minnie Lee is happy to speak out publicly, something she would have never considered 11 years ago when she first moved to Hong Kong from the Chinese mainland.
I suddenly heard so many different opinions when I arrived, and some of them felt completely unacceptable. Even just talking about them was too much. I had a feeling of danger. I felt there were foreign forces trying to change me or even brainwash me. But then I became curious.
Today, Minnie Lee ardently supports free speech. When the pro-democracy movement took to the streets in June, she joined them. And when the government ignored the demands, she even went on a hunger strike. Since then, the protests have escalated massively, with police using tear gas and rubber bullets and protesters hurling petrol bombs and bricks almost daily. And things just keep getting worse. Many people in Hong Kong are shocked by the violence. Victor Mo is one of them. He also arrived in Hong Kong more than a decade ago. He works in the financial sector and proudly identifies as a Hong Konger.
All Hong Kong people must condemn the violence and the illegal acts, no matter where we are from, including our friends from Germany, the US, Japan. We all need to stand up and say no to this. This must stop.
But he's not concerned about the city's freedoms. To those who say they fear that Hong Kong might become more and more like the mainland, he responds, so what?
I'm from Nanjing. I know Nanjing very well. I often go to Shanghai and to Beijing. And I know Hong Kong very well. I think there's nothing to fear. I think the source of this fear is that people don't understand the mainland.
Minnie Lee, however, is afraid of losing her freedoms. Videos where she publicly defends the democracy movement are circulating online. When her father recently texted her from the mainland, warning that what she said was inappropriate, she knew who was behind it.
My father doesn't know how to bypass the Great Firewall. There's no way he came across my speeches on the censored Chinese internet. I didn't tell him. So the only way he could have known is that state security told him. So I asked him whether agents had visited him. He didn't reply.
Minnie Lee hasn't been intimidated by the threats so far. she is still speaking out, hoping to preserve her hard-won freedoms.
Matthias, as we just saw there in your report, the mainland Chinese living in Hong Kong also have different views about the protests. Is it possible to generalize about how Hong Kongers in general regard mainland Chinese in their midst?
Well, in the last few years, there has been a lot of concern about immigration from China. There is a quota for new immigrants, and a lot of the localist politicians see this quota as too high. They see it as a deliberate policy to make the city more mainlandish. This has not been at the focus of these protests, however. These protests are about something else, and it depends a lot on more on the opinion, I would say, than on the identity or, for example, the language that people use. If you go to a protest and you speak Mandarin, you are probably going to be met with more suspicion than if you speak Cantonese, and the opponents of the protest, those who are pro-government, are often met with slogans saying go back to the mainland, or say there is suspicion, but if people integrate well into Hong Kong, or if they endorse the protests, or if they come and they voice support for the protest, they're met also quite well with by the protesters. So it depends a lot on the stance and on how the people react, but it is a topic that has been discussed a lot in this city.
What about support for the protest movement in general, Matthias? Are there any opinion polls that show us where Hong Kongers stand in relation to the protests?
Yeah, there are surveys about the general opinion, and they are regularly conducted. We have seen so far a very stable divide that is about, I would say, 3/4 to 1/4 or 2/3 to 1/3, depending on what particular question they ask in these surveys. And the escalation until recently has not changed this pattern. It depends, of course, when it comes to violence. It does not mean that all those who support the protests also support the violent actions, but 2/3 seem to blame the police more for the escalation than the protesters. This is data from October, though. The new poll from November is not out yet. We do not know how the recent events in the recent days that were a serious escalation have changed this pattern.
Matthias, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. DW's Matthias Berlinger in Hong Kong.